Hi, come on in and make yourself at home. We're a weekly Bible study here at Brentview Church. And I'm happy to have you come by today. I want you to pour yourself a coffee or a juice, get comfortable, and come with me this morning on a journey. Have you ever met a VIP, very important person in your life? I haven't met very many, but I did meet two. One was a sports hero, and the other was a politician. I'll tell you about them. The sportsman, when I worked in Detroit, my boys were just tiny, and I took them to a hockey game down at the old Olympia. That's the NHL stadium where Gordie Howe played. Well, his son was playing for a little junior team known as the Detroit Rooster Tails, and I took my boys down to see his young son, Mark, play for that team. We sat up in the stands, and there was nobody around us. And then just before the game started, a couple came and sat right behind us. They just came down the aisle and they sat right behind us. And I looked around, and who do you think it was? It was Gordie Howe and his wife Colleen. They had come to see their son Mark play. Well, I was really, really amazed. And I stood up and I said hello to him. And my boys were in awe because they had watched Gordie on TV. And then I gave Gordie my pen and I said, Gordie, do you think you could sign a little autograph for my kids? I had the program. Oh, yeah. So he took the pen and he signed the autograph. And when he was done, he took that felt pen and on Dean's nose, my son, he put a few squibbles down his nose. Well, Dean he didn't wash his face, I don't think, for a week. But that was my experience with the VIP, Gordie Howe. Sports. Now let's move the clock ahead a bit. And I left Detroit and I came here to Calgary, here to our church, Brentview Baptist. And in our audience was an older couple. They'd heard me do an illustration one time about how this province had been blessed by a premier who was a Christian, but he also had a radio broadcast called the Back to the Bible Hour. I had heard him on the farm way back in Ontario. And they came to me after the service and they said, Ron, would you like to have Premier Manning come and speak at Brentview? Oh, I said, he wouldn't do that. Yes, I think I can get him to come. He's a friend of our family. I know the man. Well, I said, if you can, we'll do it. So she made all the arrangements. Premier Manning and his wife came one Sunday morning. They stayed in the Palliser Hotel downtown. Two of my college career young men. They went down and picked him up. They were the taxi driver, and they brought him home here to the church, and he preached, and I met him, and I was overwhelmed. And he did a marvelous job that morning. And then he and his wife kindly said goodbye and went back, and I never saw him again. That was my VIP experience with a politician. First a sportsman, and then a politician. Well, this morning, I want to draw your attention to an Old Testament VIP. He was a very important person. And I want you to focus on this man who probably was ancient history's greatest VIP. God kept a personal record of his encounter with this historic character, and you can find it right in the center of the book of Daniel. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. It's a big story, and it fits a big man. He was a king, and he was perhaps the greatest ancient king that ever lived. His nation was Babylon, Saddam Hussein's country in modern times. His kingdom made up that great Eastern Empire of Hammurabi, and it ran all the way to the country in the east of India and all the way to the west to North Africa and Ethiopia. Nebuchadnezzar was his name. That's my king. No one built more brick buildings than he did. Not just one story high, but some of them were 3 and 4 stories high. He had modern high rises. It was a frenzy. He just built and built and built. He used his own imagination and he used his own power. From that came ingenuity, and from ingenuity came intrigue. His capital city ranks right along, probably beside the greatest cities that we have today in our land. And I'm talking about cities like London and New York, Moscow, Frankfurt, Rome. I'm talking 2,500 years ago, though, class. This is not up to date. That's then. Beautiful green belts, parks, man-made lakes, public squares, modern highways, canals, streetlights, boulevards, all laid out in magnificent orderliness. Surrounding his city were walls, stone walls, ramparts with watchtowers. His splendid buildings were walled in from the enemy. The fortified ramparts of that city were probably the most protected of any city in the ancient times. The stone walls were 3 stories high, and they were wide enough that 2 chariots could run side by side, pulled by 2 horses, and still have room to pass. This is Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. He had a park that covered 3 acres with fountains. It had exotic birds, fish ponds, trees imported from all over the world, magnificent gardens, dangling actually from the rocks as they were planted on the side. They were called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. You've heard of them. They're known as one of the 7 wonders of the world. They were so prominent that they were in the same category, in the same sentence, as the pyramids in Egypt. Now this morning, we're going to look into the story of a man who was an utter despot, a man of violent passions, and he had horrible moods, and yet he was a man of great intellect. He loved culture. Nebuchadnezzar, in his city, it was alive. It had wonderful nightlife, restaurants, their version of pubs. The city had libraries, and it had a modern university. We first stumble upon this man when he's only a crown prince under his failing father, Nebuchadnezzar. He shows up at Jerusalem. There is, within that Babylonian Empire, a little satellite kingdom known as Israel. They are made up of a turbulent, uncomfortable little kingdom, always fretting, always plotting, and they're having rebellion against this Babylonian rule who had just conquered them, and this tiny little Hebrew colony. They were a thorn in the flesh to this mighty kingdom called the Babylonians. Now, when the Babylonians conquered these Jews as invaders, they removed the Jewish king. His name was Jehoiakim. And in his place, they set up a puppet king by the name of Zedekiah. During all this, Nebuchadnezzar did a strange thing. He told his Babylonian officers in Jerusalem, I want you to cut through the Hebrew people, and I want you to handpick all the medically fit and all the university grads. I want the best intellect and the skilled young men. And I'm going to make them profit from training that I'm going to give them, an education that I'm going to give them back home in Babylon. So he sent them back to the Euphrates, to his city, Babylon, that great metropolis. And there, that nation was strengthened. That mighty kingdom was strengthened by the brains that they had stole out of the nation of Israel. That was Nebuchadnezzar's idea. I'm not sure how they did a mass survey to handpick these young men. The Bible's kind of short on details here. No doubt they had some personality performance. I don't know what it was. They had IQ charts, whatever they were. Medical screening, I suppose. Eye examinations, I guess. Physical fitness tests. Remember, this is a pre-science age. It's not like living in today. Back there, they were rather domestic, rather simple. So they rounded up these young men, finest in Israel, and they sent them to Babylon. And here comes this band of young Hebrews. They're like a bunch of thoroughbreds. Real high draft choices, I'd call them, top ranking. And their Babylonian professor that they give him as their teacher back in Babylon when they arrive is Ashpenaz, and under his watchful eye, he's going to oversee their training. Now, the Bible singles in 4 outstanding captives among all these young Jewish men that are sent off to Babylon. Here are their names. First one was Daniel. The next one was Hananiah. The third one was Mishael. And the other was Azariah. Now, months pass. They've been there a while now. Daniel and his companions are passing all the standards of excellence. Every subject in the palace college, they were far ahead of even the professors. The faculties would only look on in wonder and in awe. Daniel took the highest honors in the field of psychology and science, I call it. He would call it visions and dreams. Nebuchadnezzar, let's get back to him. His father has died now. He now sits on the throne of Babylon. And as he's there, let's ask him some questions. Tell me, Nebuchadnezzar, Your Majesty, how is life going for you? Now that you're the world's leading ruler, I'd ask him that question. Here's another one I'd ask him. What do you think of your future prospects as a leader of your people? Here's another one. How are your plans shaping up for the suppressing of those rebellions and civil unrest that's going to happen in your kingdom because they don't like you? Here's another one. Your kingdom is mighty, but tell me, Your Majesty, how safe are you on the throne? Nebuchadnezzar, I think, would reply with this answer. Well, the big building plans are underway in the cities. There's a huge irrigation project that's just been finished on the eastern border of our state next to the river Kibar. The booty that I brought back from conquering Egypt, the Pharaoh Necho, well, they have dozens of carved stone lions. Well, they're now my entrance, and they're adorning my front gate to my palace. Best of all, those young Hebrew slaves that I handpicked back there in Israel, that I imported, they're all now working for me. They're all on my side. My court has never had such a band of intelligent young men. My class outline today is this. He came, he saw, and he conquered. The first point is he came. What the king doesn't know, even you and I are somewhat awed by his tremendous power and might. What he doesn't know, God is on the sideline watching all the goings on. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know it yet. God is deeply involved in his life, and he's going to shortly reveal himself to that king. Now you, in our class, listening to me now, you could be in the same position. You may not know it yet, but the goings on in your life could be the same as in King Nebuchadnezzar's life. And you don't know it yet either. Do you have events in your life today, not of your making, but God's going to use them to get your attention? You, like King Nebuchadnezzar, don't even know that God was after you, and he's coming after you, and he's going to reveal himself to you. Keep that in mind. He came. God came in a dream. The best way for me to tell you the dream, let me read you the story in the book. And here it is, Daniel chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, he had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he couldn't sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, they're very superstitious, these people, and the enchanters, and the sorcerers, and the astrologers, to tell him what was in the dream. When they came in and they stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream, and it really troubles me, and I want to know what it means." Then the astrologers answered the king, "O king, I want you to live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." Well, the king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided," he says. "If you tell me what my dream was and interpret it, if you don't do it, I'm going to have you cut to pieces and your houses burned into a pile of rubble." Boy, I'll tell you, that's tough work. "But if you tell me the dream and you can explain it to me, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Wow. During the night, word got back to Daniel that the king had made this edict. But the king had gone further. He made an edict that if all the wise men in Babylon could not tell his dream, they would all be put to death, including Daniel and his pals. Well, when you get down to verse 12, during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Daniel was brought before the king, and the king spoke to Daniel. Get down to verse 26. "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dreams and interpret it?" said King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 27, Daniel replied, "Your Majesty, no man on earth is wise enough to explain the king's mystery. And no man on earth will be able to answer you. But I'm going to give you an answer that doesn't come from man. Last night, my God revealed to me what your vision was and what your dream was all about." Verse 28. "But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you lay in your bed are these." Well, can't you imagine the attention Nebuchadnezzar had with this young Hebrew, one of these bright young men that he brought all the way from Israel back into his kingdom, studied in his university under some of his best professors, and now, not even being a Babylonian, but being a Jew, he stands before the king and he gives this answer. He came, he saw. Verse 29. "Your dream, Your Majesty, is about something that's very large, and it happened in your mind, and you saw out on the plain this huge statue rising up from the sand. And it had a head at the top made of pure gold. It had a chest and arms that was pure silver. It had thighs of bronze. It had legs of iron. And its feet was made of iron and clay. And the king, who saw it, suddenly came alive. The dream came back to Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, that's what it was. You're right, Daniel, that's exactly what I did. It all makes sense. I saw it." Class, 2 days ago, I made a visit to one of our shut-ins. He's in a nursing home in the center of town, and I drove over to see him in the afternoon. It was a hot day in Calgary. Temperature was 31 degrees. I parked about 5 blocks from the nursing home, parked under a tree, and I walked in the main door. And what I was doing, I was visiting one of our members of our class. He's 93 years old. His name is Ernie. And I had asked the family if they wouldn't mind putting me on the family list so that I could come and do the visit. And they did. So I was going to go in and I was going to talk to the attendant there at the gate, tell him who I was, And maybe they would look through the scroll and they'd find there's my name under the family name. Yes, I'm invited in because no one can get into these places now with a COVID lockup. So I went and I introduced myself to this young lady behind the screen. She was from the Philippines. She had on her mask, I had on mine. And I said to her what I wanted. And she looked at me and she pretended she was looking on the screen. No, you can't come in. You don't have a reservation. Well, I said, I'm busy. I just can't always run and get a reservation because I'm making other calls as well. Could you look down the list and see if my name, it doesn't matter. You can't come in. Well, class, my heart was broken because, time is of essence. It's a long ways across the city with my car to go and visit. It's hot. And I got there and I made the sacrifice to get there. And now she won't let me in. I'll tell you what I did. I said to her, I said, young lady, would you give me a piece of paper? Why? I said, I'll show you. So she gave me a piece of paper and she pushed it under the screen. And I took my pen and I began to write. And what I did, I said, patient, Ernie, 93 years old. Visitor, and I printed my name, Ron Kernahan, but after my name, in big boxcars, I wrote the word priest. Class. She saw. You can't imagine what she did. Oh, father. I am a father. I've got 3 kids, but not like her. And she yelled over to one of her friends who was over at the gate. And she also was a Filipino. And they talked in their language. And suddenly everything changed. Class, you wouldn't believe what happened. That girl came over and she brought with her a gun. Do you ever see those guns where they put it on your head and that's where they take your temperature? I don't know how it works. I had it yesterday. Mary and I went to the dentist. We had a D&C, that's called a dusting and cleaning, and they did the same thing before we would sit in the chair. Anyway, I had to go through that rigmarole to go through there, and then she made me sign all these things, but it gets better. That young lady who should have been at the gate looking after everyone coming in, she took me to see Ernie. We went down the hall, up the elevator, and across to visit Ernie in his room. And when she was going up the elevator so slow, I thought to myself, Lord, please, don't let this young lady think this is a confessional and she's going to confess her sin to me. Because if she is, I won't receive it. The door opened, out I went. And when we got to the room, she said, Ernie, your priest is here. And I had on my mask. And Ernie was sitting in his wheelchair. And I looked, he said, Ernie, what? And I took off my mask. I said, Ernie, it's me. Oh, Ron. Well, then the lady left. And out she went. Thankfully, when I was done with Ernie, I had to go down the elevator by myself, and I went out another door that wasn't through the main door because I didn't have the heart to look at these 2 kids because they would have really probably locked me up. But I want you to know, they saw. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. He saw because Daniel had revealed to him what had gone on in his life. All right, let's keep going. He conquered. Verse 38. Here's Daniel. He's talking. This was the dream. And now I'm going to interpret it for you, king, said Daniel. You, O king, are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion. He's given you power, and he's given you might, and he's given you glory. And in your hands he has placed mankind, all the beasts of the field, all the birds of the air, wherever they live, he has made you the ruler over them all. And you, O king, are the head of gold in your dream. The great God has shown the king what has taken place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy, and he conquered. Have you ever heard of Sir Malcolm Sargent? He was one of Britain's greatest conductors in music. He was a vibrant personality. Lots of applause he had in his lifetime. Lots of success. Even glory from the Queen herself. In his early career, he was stricken with tuberculosis. For 2 years, he labored to overcome that dreaded disease. Just as his health was getting back to be tolerable and he could go back to work and he could lift the baton and he could do his work, he discovered that his 13-year-old daughter, Pamela, had contracted polio. For 6 years, Malcolm Sargent did everything he could to alleviate his daughter's suffering. As the years progressed, her condition deteriorated. It's December. It's just before Christmas. Sir Malcolm Sargent is conducting the London Philharmonic and the London Chorus, and it's taking place at Prince Albert Hall, one of the largest halls, I think, in Britain. It looks like the old Maple Leaf Gardens in downtown Toronto. Seats almost 4,000. The Queen was present in the royal box along with the royal family. Just before the concert was to begin, Sargent was handed a note, and the note was from Pamela's doctor over at the hospital, whom Malcolm Sargent had spent the morning with. And the note read, "Pamela is not expected to live. She will die tonight." Signed the doctor. With a broken heart, Malcolm Sargent walked on the stage at the Royal Albert Hall. He lifted his baton. The music began. And when he came to those words in Isaiah, comfort ye, my people," Malcolm Sargent, in front of that orchestra and in front of that chorus, led with tears coming down his cheek. "He shall reign forever and ever." Some said afterwards that his face seemed to almost radiate, beyond what words could describe. The concert ended, and the audience rose, and the Queen rose, and the applause was deafening. It seemed to never stop. Malcolm made 2 curtain calls. And while he was conducting, members of the orchestra had said, "We have never seen Malcolm Muggeridge in such fine performance." And those that were in the choir had said the same. It was as if the orchestra had been planted there from heaven, and the chorus was a chorus of angels, because the performance was the greatest England had ever heard. After Malcolm Muggeridge had his second curtain call, he immediately went to the hospital to see his daughter. When he arrived, he was met by Pamela's doctor. And the doctor put his arms around Malcolm's shoulders and said, "Malcolm, Pamela is gone. She passed away an hour ago." Malcolm Muggeridge looked at the doctor and he said, "That's when I ended the Hallelujah chorus, and he shall reign forever and ever." My daughter left at the end of the Hallelujah chorus. The next day, Malcolm Muggeridge was met by the press, and they asked him this: "What are your thoughts having conducted England's greatest concert and having lost your daughter in the midst of the concert?" He said, "I want most of all the same kind of faith as my daughter Pamela. The Christian faith that helps you to live, and it also helps you to die." She conquered. When Sir Malcolm Sargent lay on his deathbed in agony, he spoke of his Christian faith and that of his daughter Pamela. And here are his parting words: "I'm going to see Pamela. I'm now in the hands of Jesus." He came, he saw, and he conquered. What happened to Daniel? Let me read it for you. It's verse 48 down in the bottom end of chapter 2. "Then the king placed Daniel in a high position, and he lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire country of Babylon. He placed him in charge of all the wise men at the university. And Daniel remained in the royal court. Has it ever occurred to you that you could come and you could see and you could conquer? You can. God's waiting to place you in his royal court. He's got a position for you, and he's waiting for you. Why don't you take it? Amen. I usually close my class with a smile from the sunny side of the street. Here's my smile for you today. Dr. Peter Craigie was the head of religious studies at the University of Calgary many years ago. He was the father of 2 little children. He had a little boy, just born, just 3 or 4 months old. His wife was an anesthetist down at the Colonel Belcher Hospital. And Peter Craigie used to invite me to come to his class over at the university and just audit his Hebrew classes. Some of the material that you just heard comes from the lips of Peter Craigie. What I taught you in class today really was Peter. Well, Peter asked me one night to come with him. He was doing a lecture in one of the small churches here in town, and I went along. When we got to the church, everything was set up and it was full. Standing room only. And they had for his lecture a nice little stand. And on the stand they had a little tumbler. And over here they had a nice pitcher of water. Full water. Well, Peter started in and he gave his talk. And halfway through, it was very hot. He took off his jacket and he just set the jacket down. And there he had on his shirt and tie and his trousers. And they were gray. Well, the worst thing happened. Class, while he was lecturing, whatever happened, he tipped over that mug of pitcher of water and it hit him right in the web and down it went and he was covered. Well, the audience was aghast. They looked at him and says, "Oh no." Well, Peter didn't miss a word. He looked at himself, he looked at the audience, and then he said, "You know, before I came to speak to you, I just changed my son's diaper. And you know what? I should have brought an extra one." Well, the audience burst and they laughed and then on he went and they forgot all about it. That's my smile from the sunny side of the street. Listen, we're still locked up in Calgary. We still have to wear a mask. We have to distance. We have to keep washing. But listen, it's going to soon be over. And when we get back to class, I'm going to look for you. And I don't know when we're going to be, and I don't know what we're going to be doing, but I'm going to be with you, and I can't wait to see your face. You can see mine, but I can't always see you guys because I don't know where you are and where you're watching from. But the day is coming soon when we are going to see each other. And can you imagine what that will be like? It'll almost be our own. He came, he saw, and he conquered. That's going to be our conquering day. That's enough for today. Way you go. I'll look for you next week. Bye for now.